We're going to try and present our kind of perspective on a migrant crisis in Latin America and the Caribbean region, and also give you some sense of what GOAL is doing in programming in response to those different crises. We'll go through some of the issues in a sort of a high-level way, and please forgive us for doing that. There's some sort of complex issues that we could talk about in a lot more detail, but we're trying to kind of give it an overview and trend of the issues related to migration in Latin America and the Caribbean. I think it's good, you know, given the audience that and the context of this presentation, just to remind ourselves of our own crisis that happened in Ireland in the 1850s, and that migration is directly related to instability. And that's something that we're kind of very aware of in GOAL. And it's something that we are seeking to understand in our work in Latin America and the Caribbean region. What are the drivers of instability that lead to migration? I guess one way of summarizing it is different lenses that you can put on this, but kind of key drivers that we see and the consequences of instability in the Latin America Caribbean region that lead to migration are inequality, abuse of power over decades and centuries, insecurity, and then disaster vulnerability. Maybe just at the outset to give you a flavor of what GOAL is doing programmatically in the LAC region, and then we'll talk more about the context. And so we have a strong presence throughout Latin America in 8 countries. We have 3 countries as sort of operational hubs, the principal one being in Honduras, in head office in Tegucigalpa, and in regional offices in the north coast of Honduras. Then we have a strong presence in Haiti, an office in Port-au-Prince and in Jeremy. I should say in Honduras, I think it's approximately, it says 97 staff there, but it's about 120 now, and about 50 staff in Haiti, sorry. And then in Colombia, we have 2 offices in Colombia, in Barranquilla, Bucaramanga, and also a smaller office actually in Bogota as well. And we have about 25 staff there. So that's our operational presence. The different programming that we're doing in the LAC region, we describe those in colors, helps us to kind of present them and kind of frame our program. So one of our kind of key programs is an urban resilience program that targets informal urban settlements. So that's the Barrio Resiliente program, or the Orange program, that's currently been implemented in 6 cities throughout the Latin America and Caribbean region, 2 in Colombia, 2 in Honduras, and 2 in Haiti. A flagship program for us is our Blue Economy program. We've been working on that for well over 10 years. That's targeting sustainable fisheries and ecotourism throughout the Latin America and Caribbean region. You see it's the blue program shown on the map there. It's extended right across over 1,000 kilometers of the Caribbean coast in Honduras and Guatemala, and then also extends into the Pacific coast between in cross-border programming between El Salvador and Guatemala. We've also introduced that into Haiti in the Grand Dance region, and then also more recently introduced that into Colombia. And that's very much centered on the blue economy and sustainable management of marine coastal resources. A similar program in the green economy called Inspire, working in forestry and agroforestry, principally in Central America, and looking to expand that into other parts of the region as well. Humanitarian leadership, and this is very much at the core of GOAL's DNA. That's about GOAL being capable to, ready to respond to crisis in partnership with national risk management agencies throughout the LAC region. And we've responded to the various emergencies from the Haiti earthquake in 2010, the earthquakes in El Salvador 2001, Hurricane Mitch, as we mentioned earlier, in 1998, and various other smaller emergencies in between. And then more recently, the 2 major Category 5 hurricanes that impacted on the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua and Honduras in November. 2 Category 5 hurricanes are just unprecedented, and and really kind of highlights the need to address climate change as a global challenge. And so responding to crisis is very much part of Goal's DNA, and it's our humanitarian leadership program. But also within that, we work with national risk management agencies, social protection systems throughout the Latin America, Caribbean region to increase their capacity to respond. We also do work in technical services, supporting other development and humanitarian actors apply systems approach and resilience into their programming. We have a Resilience Innovation and Learning Hub based out of the LAC region, where we try and capture innovations across Goal in resilience and disseminate those more across Goal and outside of Goal to the wider sector. And then resilient health and global health is very much part of Goal's programming across Africa, and it's something that we are bringing into our programming in Central America as well. So that's an overview of our programs. I want to focus our discussion on migration hotspots that are kind of the leading to humanitarian crisis in the LAC region. There's lots of different issues related to migration, but this is the focus that Goal is kind of centered on. And so maybe just to give a quick kind of background, I'm not going to talk about colonialism too much, but it is a kind of a major factor in kind of driving migration in the LAC region. The sort of the inequality that was put in place through a colonial system over centuries that kind of created a smaller group in control of resources and power, and a wider group of much poor, vulnerable people. That sort of transitioned after most of the countries got independence in the early 1800s. That transitioned into a very different dynamic, and the United States took a kind of a strong position, which was laid out initially in the Monroe Doctrine, where the United States would work with Latin American countries to reduce the risk of future colonization in the region. And I guess a lot of people kind of refer to that moment as maybe the start of American or United States interventionism in Latin America and the Caribbean region. And so the migration hotspots that are the kind of key focus for Goal are really these countries as sort of origins of migrants. When we talk about migration, we talk about countries of origin, of transit, and destination. So these are the origin countries. So Central America is a key one. Haiti and Venezuela. There's a lot of other things happening in relation to migration in the region, but these are the ones that are kind of where the kind of key humanitarian crises are centered. So just talking about Central America, this is something that we've seen a lot in the news recently over the last couple of years, the caravanas of migrants leaving from Central America and walking 1,000 kilometers to look for a better future in the United States in particular. But the caravanas really is just the tip of the iceberg, and the caravanas may happen once or twice a year, and there's 7,000 or 10,000 people who walk that route. But there's an ongoing permanent sort of movement of people from Central America into the United States through all these different routes in various different forms. Often paid by, using human traffickers to follow these routes into the United States, and extremely vulnerable along the way in these routes. And we can talk about that in more detail. So in the United States, which is the kind of primary destination for people migrating from the Northern Triangle in Central America, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. There's about 3 million people who were born in Central America who currently reside in the United States as refugees or as migrants. Two of the kind of key mechanisms that were available to migrants is the deferred action for childhood arrivals, often referred to as the dreamers. These are children that arrived in the United States and maybe weren't aware that they were entering illegally, and there was a mechanism introduced for them to be able to seek access to healthcare, education, and employment, and that's renewed every 2 years. It's been quite controversial in US politics recently. There was different efforts made to terminate the DACA mechanism, but that has continued, and it's a key protection for many migrants in the United States from Central America. And then there's the temporary protection status, which was a mechanism that was put in place to support migrants leaving Central America, Haiti, after major humanitarian crisis, particularly Mitch in 1998 and the hurricane in Haiti in 2010. So the vast majority of Central American migrants in the United States comes from the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And we'll focus a little bit on what are the drivers behind migration from these countries. I guess one thing to reflect on is the trend has changed. Prior to the 1970s, there was very few Central American migrants in the United States. It was primarily interregional mobility. From the 1970s up to the 1990s, there was civil wars across Central America, not Honduras, but Honduras was engaged in some of those civil wars through the Contra War. So it was a lot of conflict and instability in Central America during that period, and people escaping from that violence and repression and military rule that was related to that. A lot of those civil wars came to an end in the 1990s, and there was a different dynamic in migration, people leaving more for economic reasons, driven by looking for economic opportunities in the United States. And then from the 2000s onwards, it's been a mix of that same kind of driver looking for economic opportunity, but also growing levels of insecurity in Central America, particularly after 2009. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I guess one factor that's kind of very important to understand in Central America is the sort of political instability that's, the seeds were sort of put in place, I guess, through the colonial period and created that sort of class divide that's very prominent in many parts of Latin America, and American interventionism kind of supported a transition to power to large US companies, and there was a lot of engagement from the US in protecting US interests in Central America, and that allowed US companies to be hugely influential, and it limited and restricted the kind of development of government institutions and democracy in Central America, and kind of was a factor in the political instability that's in place today. And people would have heard of the Banana Republic, which kind of links to these large primarily US companies exporting tropical fruits from Central America. The Cold War was a major factor related to American interventionism in the Latin America, Caribbean region, and particularly in Central America. And there was it was a big factor in how the civil wars that were ongoing sort of played out, and it added a lot to the instability and political instability in Central America in particular. Central America is one of the most dangerous regions in the world. It has the highest, some of the highest homicide and violent death rates in the world. This list shows El Salvador as currently the country with the highest homicide rate in the world. Honduras is not too far behind, and Guatemala is down there as well. Ireland is shown there, so you can see the comparison. And actually, these figures are quite low because there's been a lot of progress made recently, but the trends over the last number of years have been exceptionally high. And Honduras has made a lot of good progress. Recently, you see the orange line there. But after, say, 2009, there was a sort of political crisis in in Honduras, and that coincided with a lot of the Mexican drug cartels becoming more influential in Central America, and the homicide rates were for a number of years even higher than 100 people dying through homicides per 100,000 of the population. So major factors there. I think there's two kind of reasons why there's such a high degree of or two ways that this is sort of manifesting. One is in the drug trade, and Central America's and the Northern Triangle is sort of in the crossroads between the largest market in the world for illegal drugs and the largest sort of producers in Colombia and Venezuela. And so you have this sort of dangerous mix of the Mexican drug cartels controlling land routes and the Colombian drug cartels controlling the production and distribution as well. And Central America is just unfortunately in the crossroads for that. There's also the factor of street gangs, which a lot of the street gangs in Central America have their origins in the United States, and that's very much linked to migration. When we were talking about in between the 70s and the 90s, people leaving from Central America into the United States and became marginalized in US cities, and then sort of fell into crime and street gangs. And at one point, there was a policy to deport gang members back to their countries of origin, and that sort of introduced to a much greater degree the presence of street gangs in Central America, and it's grown dramatically over the last number of years. So you have this sort of dangerous mix of drug cartels and street gangs leading to very high levels of insecurity, and that is a major driver in migration right now from Central America. And then you have those factors that Central America is extremely vulnerable to major hazards such as the North Atlantic hurricane season, the El Nino droughts over the past 5-6 years, earthquakes in El Salvador, landslide flooding, volcanoes in the region. So it's extremely vulnerable to natural hazards, and that's only increasing with the onset of climate change. So just kind of briefly, what is GOAL doing in response? So we have an integrated program across Central America, progressing economic development, sustainable urban development, social protection, disaster preparedness. We try and do that working with a whole range of different partners to build capacity to respond, and then we're there as a partner to provide surge capacity when crisis hits. So the blue economy is a significant part of our program there. The Barrio Resiliente urban program, we've been doing that for over 10 years, and various other programs in economic development and humanitarian leadership. I do want to just go into a little bit of detail. I'm not going to describe all of what's shown here, but this is a representation of our blue economy intervention. GOAL is kind of developed a sort of a systems approach to how we address social challenges in our work. And so we try to understand the local systems that we're engaging with. And one of the tools that we use is to map out those systems and try and understand the interaction between different actors, and then also understand how those systems are impacted by crisis. So this is a representation of the blue economy in the north coast of Honduras, with every single actor mapped out in their relationship, and it shows the flow of production across the market system in small-scale fisheries. And there's a whole range of different ways that GOAL engages with those different actors to strengthen the functioning of that system, to make it more resilient and more inclusive. There's various kind of aspects to the Blue Economy program. We can talk about it in more detail. We come under the headings of economic, social, and environmental kind of essentials that we try and support to be put in place to establish an inclusive and effective or resilient blue economy, from traceability, financial inclusion, business development services, market linkages, traceability, responsible fishing practices, and early warning response systems. All these different aspects are necessary to support the sustainable development of the blue economy. And we've been very successful in supporting small businesses, cooperatives link up with market actors in a way that protects and sustains marine coastal resources. Just to mention very briefly about Nicaragua, which is a slightly different, it hasn't sort of gone in the same direction in terms of insecurity as other countries in Central America, and there's different reasons for that. And it hasn't sort of followed that migration route to the United States to the same degree. And so there's been significant movement of migrants from Nicaragua into Costa Rica. About 350,000 Nicaraguans living in Costa Rica who were born in Nicaragua. That's something that we could talk about in more detail, but I'm just passing over that now. And I do also want to mention Haiti. We have a very strong program in Haiti over a number of years since the earthquake in particular. And Haiti is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world. It's been impacted by political instability over hundreds of years almost, and it's still very much in crisis right now. And impacted by major disasters, the earthquake and different storms that have hit recently, and then growing levels of insecurity. And so there's significant movement of migrants, particularly to the Dominican Republic, and then throughout the Latin America region as well. And particularly more recently, a trend of Haitian migrants moving into South America. There was an economic boom in Brazil following leading up to the Olympics and the World Cup. And a lot of Haitian workers moved to Brazil for that, but there's been continuing movement from Haitians into South America and then into Canada and into the US as well. I'm going to pass over to Marcelo to talk about the Venezuelan migrant crisis and maybe give a bit more detail on what GOAL is doing in response to migrant crisis. So Marcelo, over to you.
Thank you very much. In Latin America, during the first decade of the 21st century, the left-wing parties started to rule the public policies in South America, and all of them are focused on trying to reduce the gaps and the inequalities and fighting against poverty. But their policies were laid on pure economic policies that generates slow growth, and especially because there is corruption, all of that public policies not arrive to the pure people in order to increase their capacity to reach human dignity and other issues. The next, please. And in particular, Venezuela laid these public policies in the oil reserve, because it is the largest reserve in the world, the oil reserve in the world. And Hugo Chavez used this kind of reserve, next please, and use this kind of reserve and the incomes from the oil market to start this his public policies and address it to the poor ones through, Bernard, please, the next one, and through food subsidies, improved education, and health care. All of these policies generate a reduction of the Venezuelan poverty rate, and during the Hugo Chavez government, the situation in Venezuela was quite well. But during the ascent to the government by Maduro in 2014, the crisis, worldwide crisis in the oil market generates that collapse the prices of the oil, and as a consequence of this crisis, all that public policies and all that subsidies started to go down, and so starting with the problems inside Venezuela with turmoil and other situations. As a result of the collapse of the prices in the oil market, started to and hyperinflation. Next, please, Bernard. A hyperinflation in Venezuela, and so this gap reduced by Hugo Chavez during his government started to increase again, and the poorest layers of the society faced high levels of needs and high levels of poverty or increased poverty. So they try to flee to other countries looking for a well-being. Next. When I speak about hyperinflation, this picture is eloquent in terms of how much money Venezuela need to buy toilet paper. This is a real picture of the cost of the toilet paper. Next, please. So, as a result of the situation inside the Venezuela, Maduro tried to rule every power of the country. In particular, the justice through the Supreme Court and the National Assembly, and became a totalitarian government. So in 2015, the situation between, especially in Colombia and Venezuela, arrived to the summit, and both countries closed their borders, and people decided to flee from Venezuela to the other countries. Next, please. And this is a picture of the exodus of Venezuelan people from 2015-16 till 2018. And as you can see, the most recipient countries were in South America, and in particular, Venezuela, Colombia, sorry, and Peru. Next one. And now, in this year, we have 1.8 million Venezuelans living in Colombia, near 800,000 in Peru, and in the other countries of South America. And near 20% of people of Venezuela are living outside his country. Next, please. And how they move from Venezuela to other countries? Through two main routes. One is through Caracas in the center of Colombia, and the other one from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific one, and coming back to the south. And here we have three categories of migrants. The first one is that people in transit. In transit is by foot, or people that use transport means to move from one country to other, or inside, in this case in Colombia, from one municipality to other city inside the country. And in particular, people in transit or migrant in transit face a lot of hazard and threats during their journeys, especially because this picture is a formal border pass. But when the cross border was closed, many of them passed through illegal passes or pathway, and that pathway are used by illegal armed actors or drug traffic cartels, etc. And so they have to pay for during the journey to face this kind of situations. And the second category of migrant is the people with vocation to live in the countries where they are staying. And the third one is the Colombian returnees. Colombian returnees is a category that originally they went to Venezuela because the armed conflict inside Colombia, and now because the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela has to return to Colombia. Next one. So the situation in general, this is an illegal cross-border. In the far part of the picture is Venezuela, and the near one is Colombia. And all of that people is ruled by illegal actors. And so these migrants raised the four main needs. One is food, shelter, job or income generating activities, and health. And all of that priorities or needs are related with the situation on the hyperinflation in Honduras. They are trying to live a common style of life. And so Goal started to address this need. Please, next. Through three of our main strategies. One is the humanitarian leadership to respond immediately to the needs posed by the people. The second one is in a longer term strategy to income generation opportunities. And the third one is creating resilience from the people and supporting them to develop positive coping strategies. In our humanitarian leadership approach, we respond to the immediate needs of the people through cash transfer. Cash transfer is the best way for the people in need to support their needs in terms of shelters or in terms of medicines, etc., etc. Protection case management is managing these particular cases that people has is victim of any kind of human rights violations, giving them through cash transfer or supporting shelters in the route to obtain a place to overnight in a safe way. Another immediate needs, as for example transport, because as I mentioned, people that is moving by foot are facing a lot of kind of threats. And our second strategy, this is the income generation opportunities through, as explained Bernard, the blue economy, and another kind of systemic approach. We are trying to work in this nexus between humanitarian and development approaches. Our idea is to work in generating and establishing the basis for sustainable development of these people that just arrived and trying to stay in the countries. How? Thinking in a systemic approach, but also thinking in conflict sensitiveness and conflict transformation, because there are a lot of conflicts inside the cities, of host cities, between migrants and Colombians, and this approach generate or promote the social cohesion between the people and generate sustainable development from both Colombia's and Venezuelan one. And also, in addition to the blue economy, we are working in other markets as handcraft or street sellers or informal economies, all of them thinking on these sustainable opportunities. And the third one approach in income generation opportunities is working together with the local government, national governments, and also the National Federation of Traders or other federations to improve the employment skills of the Venezuelan and the pure Colombians that are looking for access to the job market or other kind of market. The third approach is barrios resilientes or resilient neighborhood, that we are working in disaster-prone areas, and in this informal settlement, particularly inside the cities, we are trying to generate the conditions to promote inclusive cities. And also here, in supporting the income generation opportunities, we have a longer-term strategy to formalize migrant routes, and because, as I mentioned, we try to work together the local authorities, and the routes or migrant routes are in different departments and different cities. We try to formalize the migrant routes in a systemic approach and trying to generate a holistic response to the crisis. Next, please. And for this reason, we are very, very glad to the Colombian government decision to grant legal status to the Venezuelan migrants, because we are working in, or our response is focused on promote the access to different sectors, health, education, jobs, etc. And this decision is very, very important for us to leverage the decision of the government, but also to promote the human rights of the migrants, also returnees and pure Colombians. Thanks, Bernard. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much. Bernard, you're on mute. You might want to turn off your mic. Sorry, turn on your mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Perfectly,
yeah. So
yeah.
That was the last slide. Hopefully we didn't go over too much on time, and there's some time for discussion.
No, not at all. Thanks so much. I think that was a brilliant insight into relevant history in the region and the current situation. Just two comments before maybe we invite for questions. I mean, I think it's one lesson definitely from working in Latin America and with Latin America for so long. I think the generosity, of neighboring nations like Peru, Brazil, Colombia, to take in so many Venezuelan migrants, is commendable. I remember visiting one of our partner universities in Brazil, Unicamp, a few years ago, and they had a special program for students from Haiti. They gave them full scholarships to come and do undergrad studies and live on campus. maybe, lessons to be learned for us in Europe. And there's been a lot of discussion about, I suppose, the European context this week at our sessions. And another comment is, the Northern Triangle that you mentioned in Central America. Luckily, through our efforts in UCC, we've had good partnerships with universities in El Salvador and Honduras. And actually, we have 2 Honduran staff who hopefully are on the webinar today, Yensi and David. And we won some European Union seed funding to do some capacity building in biotechnology in Honduras, which was very successful. But we've always been talking about, trying to do more, and and how climate change has really affected food security and every part of life in that northern triangle of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. Very sadly, coffee crops, some of the best coffee in the world is now really vulnerable. So I suppose one question would be how, as a UCC community, staff and students, how we could maybe get more involved with GOAL. In UCC, we have a connected curriculum, that works to build in sustainability, community engagement, and global citizenship, global reach into, what we teach and what we learn. So I think that it would be a great opportunity to get involved more. So yeah, delighted to open it up to questions, and thanks so much for an amazing presentation, Bernard and Marcelo. So if anyone would like to raise their hand, feel free to do it, or Claire, if you want to call out some questions.
We have one hand up, Cleena, there from David Williams.
David Wilkins from GOAL.
Sorry,
thanks.
David Wilkins, sorry.
Thank you, Bernard and Marcelo. That was a super presentation. I suppose a quick question that struck me as you were talking about it and reflecting on the previous United States administration. How do we feel, or how do you guys think that the recent change in the administration in Washington might help or affect the situation with regard to the migrant crisis in South America or in Central America?
Yeah, that's the big question that everybody's watching right now. The last 4 years, I think it's fair to say, have been difficult, and there's been a lot of sort of abrupt decisions made in relation to migration policy in the US affecting Central America. For example, the DACA mechanism or the Dreamers sort of bill that has proven to be very successful. And the people that entered into that, have been able to access education and carry out kind of key roles in different professions across the US. And there has been various attempts to terminate that policy over the last 4 years. Thankfully, that didn't happen. I think there's more certainty about the future of that. Really, I think there's hopefully going to be less talk about walls and more talk about sort of a comprehensive migration policy that gives a path to citizenship for many illegal or undocumented migrants in the US who contribute a lot to US society. Everybody is hopeful, but you can immediately see a change in the relationship between the United States and Central America on a number of fronts. One of the kind of recent policies that was put in place in the last year, which will need to be looked at carefully, is this third safe country mechanism. So any migrants leaving from Central America were first required to seek asylum in the countries in transit. So leaving from Honduras, first seek asylum in Guatemala, then Mexico, before being able to seek asylum in the US. That's caused a lot of problems, and people leaving violence in sort of informal urban settlements in Honduras. Guatemala is not a safe haven for them. There's I guess there's a kind of a significant change in policy you can feel happening already, and everybody's waiting to see what an overall comprehensive migration policy will be for the US, but it depends on whether that can be bipartisan and get through the Congress. So we're hopeful for that over the next years, but the signs and the outlook is much more positive.
Thank you.
Gertrude is next. She's got her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, is my sound okay?
Yes, yeah.
Is it okay? 'Cause my sound is often problematic. Thank you very much. That was really, really very helpful to update us on how where things are at in many areas. Sorry, I just loud and clear. Okay, thanks, Claire. I have loads of questions actually, but I suppose maybe the most important and immediate one is just to say that I am working in the area of development and global citizenship education in UCC, and we have a transdisciplinary, a whole load of about 35 UCC staff, and I'm sure there are many others, but this particular group that I'm with are wanting to work on issues and with organizations, and I just want to let you know that we are here. They're from a whole range of different disciplines, and there's great potential. And I suppose I just I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on working with university staff from an ethical, strategic, developmental kind of perspective, and long-term perspective, and some thoughts on that. And there are many other people in UCC I know as well. And secondly, just to talk a little bit more about the combination of street gangs and drug cartels. It just seems to me that it's extraordinary. It's going on so long, and it's such a difficult, just from a personal security and those kinds of reasons, those security reasons for people on the move. I mean, what are some of the actions that are being taken on the ground, or what are some of the possibilities, or where do you go with this? It just seems to be getting worse. And what are some of the actions that are being taken in the Central American countries in that area? Thanks. I also wanted to ask about Biden's election and the various other things, but that's good for this. That's good.
Yeah, and Gertrude, we hopefully have kind of continued discussions with UCC and explore different areas of collaboration. Maybe addressing the last point that you made first around insecurity, and in Central America, in the Northern Triangle, insecurity is very much concentrated in informal urban settlements. You have gangs that control 50 to 60% of the major cities in Central America, and it's heartbreaking to see. It's an area that Goal has been working in for 20 years plus, working in the highest, the most dangerous neighborhoods in Central America. It's like a military operation. Sometimes the Goal's logistics to go in and meet communities and engage with communities. Some of the surveys that we've done over the years, you can see that about 1 in 10 households have someone leaving the household, migrating to the US because of the levels of insecurity. So 1 in 10 households in the previous 12 months had someone leaving. So we're very much taking this problem on head on. It's interesting when we're talking about the kind of migration in the LAC region. There's kind of different ways you can look at this. The countries of origin, there's the countries of transit, and the destination countries. Colombia, for example, is one that's all three. It's both a source of migration of migrants, it's a transit, and it's also a destination. But Central America is more a country of source and people leaving. And so our approach is trying to address instability and address kind of the longer term challenges. So sustainable urban development is a big issue. How to address informality in urban centers. So we've designed an approach, which is the Barrio Resiliente approach, which tries to tackle kind of underlying issues in working with small businesses. How does a small business operate in a gang-controlled neighborhood? So working with small businesses to enable them to do that, and their connection with critical market systems. Working on social housing, working on drainage, and drainage is so important for a number of reasons. You know, it reduces the risk of landslide, flooding, and infectious diseases. So critical to kind of sustainable urban development. But looking at good governance in the city as well. So there's a whole range of things that we've sort of built into an approach that addresses informal urban settlements to create a future for youths and people living in those neighborhoods. And it is feasible, and we are making progress, and we've had sort of peer review work done with Florida International University and others looking at the progress that we're making in improving quality of life for people living in those high-risk neighborhoods. And progress is being made. It's not quick. There's no immediate solution, but progress is being made. And I think Barrio Resiliente and other models like that will have a big part to play. It would be great to talk more about areas of collaboration. You know, we engage a lot with academic institutions. I think a key thing for Goal, where we can partner with academic institutions, is working together on understanding context, doing conflict sensitivity analysis, understanding local systems, understanding the key issues and where we have a role to play, and then also communicating those, you know, with peer-reviewed research. I think, like Goal as a practitioner, we engage with communities, with actors, we engage at the cold face, but we don't always communicate what we're learning as much as we should. And I think there's lots of opportunities for partnership from both those perspectives in understanding context and then communicating, you know, successful approaches and interventions.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks,
Great.
Bernard. I don't see any. There's lots of people saying thank you for a really great presentation and congratulations. Lots of that from different people in the chat. But I don't see any other hands up at the moment. But I have one question myself, and it's more for Marcelo. And it's just in your presentation, you mentioned how Colombia has announced that they will grant people to stay for 10 years. And I just wondered, could you say a little bit more of what happened in those negotiations for that to come about? And is there that same kind of willingness in other countries, neighboring countries? Because it seems like that's a fantastic move on the part of Colombia, who are hosting, like you said in your presentation, is it 1.8 million Venezuelan? So I just wondered if you could say a little bit more on that, Marcelo. Thank you.
Okay, the situation of the Venezuelans living in Colombia and trying to stay in Colombia is related to the geopolitical relations and the decision between Venezuela and Colombian government, because Colombian government tries to receive the Venezuelan crisis, and it's a paradox in Colombia in relation to this situation, because from one side Colombia is the most important recipient country of Venezuela, but at the same time is one of the most important sources of migration, Colombian migration, that are seeking for asylum in other countries. So from one part is receive people, but from the other one expel people. And before to answer your question, I answer the previous one. And this is one of the main reasons why we are working together, the universities and together in this Barrio Resilientes approach, to create from bottom to up social cohesion and understanding the living conditions inside the country. And why are living so many people here in Colombia? Because especially the only country that maintains open the borders or allow people to live here is Colombia. Ecuador closed their borders, Peru closed their borders, Brazil closed their borders. So this is the reason why they are living here. And is all the 70% or 60% of the Venezuelans arriving here are in a regular situation. They have no problems to live and to look for some kind of economic possibilities here in the country. I don't know if I answer your question.
Oh, that's good. Thank you very much. Sorry, I just saw actually there's one hand up that I missed, and that's Margaret Breheny. So Margaret, did you want to ask a question?
Hi there. Thanks very much for really wonderful presentations and, you know, tremendous information on what's happening on the ground and what GOAL is doing in the region. And I'm just wondering, you know, I see you have quite a big strategy in the Caribbean region, and I see Cuba, it doesn't feature in that at all. I'm just wondering, what are the reasons for that? I mean, I know the issues are different. Personal security is probably not as big an issue as it is in many other parts of Latin America and Central America, but food security and poverty, and a significant migration flow outward, and also the fact that, you know, Cubans, you know, for so long could get into the US more easily, and that has recently changed. So I know there have appeared in greater numbers in the migrant caravans, for instance, in Central America.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering why that is.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and probably the real answer is our capacities, you know, to extend our program into Cuba. We did a kind of very comprehensive process a number of years ago to explore whether GOAL is relevant in Cuba, and we had a lot of engagement with the Cuban authorities. They did a very detailed due diligence on GOAL right around the world, and we got invited by the Cuban authorities to operate in Cuba. They were particularly interested in our approach to working with cooperatives and associations of small businesses, which is very relevant to their kind of economic development model. And they were kind of very supportive of our approach to resilience. And we were making steps to kind of advance a program into Cuba. Kind of a key factor in that was the kind of improving relations during the Obama administration with Cuba. And that would have sort of enabled us to access funding to establish a program in Cuba. That all came to a very abrupt stop over the past 4 years. And it's something that we will look at again. We have to be realistic about, you know, what's feasible for GOAL, and where are we relevant. And Cuba is something that we will look at again from that perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Margaret.
There is a question from Peter also.
Yes.
Okay. Really, there is no public opposition to the policies or public policy from the Colombian government to relate to migration crisis. Because in general, there is a close relationship between Colombians and Venezuelan. In general, the Colombian people welcome the Venezuelan. But the opposition to the government, the public opposition to the government, is related to the implementation of peace agreement, not to the migration crisis, but the peace agreement. And in general, this is the situation. And here are accepted the Venezuelans. So related to this last decision to regularize the Venezuelans, etc., both opposition and government are agreed to that is a crucial and great decision for everyone.
I think it's worth mentioning as well, there's kind of a very kind of close history between Venezuela and Colombia, and in not too distant history, they were once the part of the same country. but it's very fresh. I think in Colombians' memory, the number of Colombian migrants that left from Colombia into Venezuela seeking asylum during the civil war in Colombia. And so there's sort of an increased, I guess, reception because of that sort of social link between both countries and that recent history during the Colombian Civil War.
Great. I see there's another question there from John Barimo, who's working in sustainability. Do you want to, will I read it out, John, or do you want to open your camera?
Okay. Yeah, I don't mind. I was just wondering, it seems that in the last few years, there's been more hurricane strikes in Central America. They haven't been turning as much to the north. And I'm wondering what you think has been, how much of a factor that's played in human migration issues, especially since, you know, given like what you were talking about earlier with drainage and the landslides and all this that are associated with the hurricanes. So I'm just wondering, has that been a driver, or has it just appeared like that way? Because I mean, it's linked to climate change, right? You know.
Yeah. We do a lot of work with NOAA in the LAC region. We've done a lot of work in sort of studying hurricane tracks and frequencies of impact from different storms, and typically you get a major storm impact. We've estimated once every 25 years. So we had Mitch in 1998. We've had 2 Category 5 storms in November last year, and so we're kind of very aware of the risk. We've just gone through a sort of an extended El Nino period, and we're sort of transitioning into La Nina. El Nino was much more extended than what people expected. People are very apprehensive about what's going to happen in La Nina over the next couple of years. And it is a major factor, John, in driving migration. It is it's you know, after Mitch, after the earthquakes in El Salvador, the same in Haiti in 2010. It's a driver of migration, and so climate change is going to be a major factor driving migration in Central America, continuing to be a driver over the next number of years. And I guess the view of GOAL is that climate change is here. We need to adapt to it. We work with communities, you know, through the blue economy, through urban resilience, through working with social protection systems to build capacity to adapt to the impact of climate change, and hopefully that will reduce the outflow of migrants from Central America as well. But again, it's one that doesn't have a sort of a quick answer, but working on kind of critical systems and building their capacity to be resilient to shocks and stresses is a kind of key part of our strategy. And yeah, there's going to be more and more major storms in the years ahead. In the next 4 or 5 years is going to be difficult. I hate saying it, but it's a reality. You know?
Because yeah, La Nina is tough with the hurricanes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. In the Atlantic. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and there's a couple of comments in the chat there, and it's basically mentioning how many refugees that Colombia takes and comparing it to what Ireland takes. And yeah, and then there's another comment from Gertrude, which is another question I was interested in terms of the challenges that are brought about by the pandemic. And could you say a little bit more in relation to that, in relation to your own work, how challenging it is for you?
COVID is one of the reasons why the Colombian government decided to issue this temporary status to legalize the Venezuelan, because it's the only formal way to access the irregular migrants into the health services. So yes, COVID is bringing many challenges to the migrants in general, but also to the poor in every country in Latin America, in LAC region.
Yeah, and maybe just to say a few words about COVID generally, in terms of how it's impacted GOAL's program. I think we were sort of reflecting, it's the first time that we've had to respond to a crisis in every country of our operation at the same time, and also fundamentally change our ways of working. We had to sort of mobilize an emergency response plan. As soon as the alert was raised back in January last year, we sort of mobilized a three-phase response, and that three-phase is still very relevant. There was a sort of a kickstart phase where we had to adjust all our standard operating procedures to mitigate the risk of spreading infectious disease, engage with all the different task forces in all the different countries and the coordination mechanisms, and ensure continuity of life-saving aid. That was a kind of a critical concern for GOAL at the very outset of COVID. How do we ensure we continue to deliver life-saving aid? And so we were very successful in mobilising quickly in that way, phase one, and the Irish government was a kind of a key partner to GOAL in having that flexibility in the initial adaptations that we needed to make. Then, sort of continuing that work, we had to layer on a second phase response, which was looking to address the secondary impacts, socioeconomic impacts on the functioning of health systems. So we've done a huge amount of work across all our countries in that. And then layering on the third kind of phase, which is sort of happening now. How do we ensure fair and equitable access to vaccines? And so that's a big part of our program right now. But we have to fundamentally change how we work. We have very good tools in remote management because we work in very difficult parts of the world, and that allowed GOAL to be agile and adaptive. You know, we operate within Syria using remote management tools. We had to introduce a lot of that across our programming in various countries because we didn't have the same access. So it's been a very difficult year for GOAL, yeah, I think it's been successful in terms of our response, but it's been a very, very difficult year for everyone.